What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 639. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from apparently sunny Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Is it sunny out, Luis, or is it summer over there?
Oh, yeah, it's really nice, and I took full advantage of the opportunity. The Jewel dog was the real winner because she went on, 2 walks today.
Wow.
Couldn't get enough of the sunlight. It's just been really cold here recently. So when there's like a break in that, I just am outside as much as I can, which not as much as I would like, given that, we've got podcast to record, I guess.
Yeah, for you. We've got a podcast to record. We're going to be going over some of the archetypes in Neo. Why am I calling it Neo? Oh, I guess it's because that's what's it called? In Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. We're going to cover three of the archetypes that we've drafted the most and feel that we have the most to say about. We're also going to be recapping the Arena Open and then talking about some individual cards that have stood out to us and some stuff from 17 Lands that was like, oh, look at this card. And we'll kind of try to get to the bottom of that as well. So lots of stuff to talk about on the podcast this week. Before we do, let's talk about our sponsors, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all things Magic related. If you want singles, you can hit the Channel Fireball Marketplace up. If you need sealed product, same thing. If you want to get supplies or even premium content over at CFB Pro, you can find it all at channelfireball.com. There's always some new exciting stuff happening at CFB. They're always pushing, right? That's one of the things about CFB is if you were to take a snapshot of it way back, like even just going back to when they started sponsoring this podcast and what they look like now, totally different company, right? They've added in a whole bunch of new stuff, changed things around, always moving and shaking over at CFB. So that's where you should go for anything you need Magic related. If you do end up picking something up, if you use the affiliate code LR when you check out, it helps out the show, lets them know that we're the ones that sent you over, and we do appreciate it. Show's also brought to you by FTX. That's the place to go to manage all of your digital assets as we move forward into the future. Digital assets seems like they're going to be part of our everyday lives at some point in one form or another. I think that that's still very much up in the air, how they interact with us and how we interact with them exactly. But we're taking the first steps in that direction now. And if you want to kind of feel out what that's like, how it works and everything, FTX is the safe, regulated place that you can go to do so. It's ftx.us inside the US and ftx.com outside of it. We thank them for their sponsorship. Also want to remind you that that is a form of investing. And if you do any investing, not just there, but anywhere, make sure that you consult a professional investor before you put your hard-earned dollars in, because there is risk and you need to understand the risks of what you're doing before you do it. And that's just good advice no matter what. We've got one last thing to mention here, of course, is a Patreon. Patreon.com/limited resources. Anybody that signs up there gets access to the Patreon feed where we ask questions like for Q&A episodes, which are some of our favorite ones to do. The Patreon question of the week, which we're going to get to in a minute here. And you also get a thank you card and an LR sticker in the mail, no matter what level you sign up at. We just really wanted to make sure to really reach out and say thank you to anybody who takes the time to support us on Patreon. We know it's totally voluntary, right? This is, this is a type of kind of a weird business model where it's like you can ask people, but they can come and go as they please. And it's like, yeah, you can. And, thankfully, there's enough people out there that like this particular content to support it. If you're one of them, patreon.com/limited resources is where you want to go. Now, the Patreon question of the week, hard hitter here, Luis. Are you ready for this? John wants to know, who are your personal heroes?
Well, I got a couple. One is that my parents. I think that my parents did a really fantastic job in. Yeah, I mean, I've got 2 brothers, and I think we're all pretty well adjusted.
Definitely. I think all but one of you are really kind people and very well adjusted and easy to get along with.
And you learned a lot of lessons from your parents. So one of the big ones that really stuck with me is my dad was a chemist, and he left a fairly high-paying job to be a kindergarten teacher because that's what he wanted to do. That's what he thought was, a better way to kind of interact with the world, and he would enjoy it more, and it would be better for his community and stuff. And that kind of stuck with me. So definitely was something that I paid attention to. And I've had a lot of really lucky opportunities, but generally I follow with what I want to do and what I think is a good thing to do. And then I actually want to mention one of the guys who kind of taught me how to play Magic, Bruce. Bruce is a bit older. He was like an adult when we first started playing. We were like 13, 14. Mm-hmm. He ran our first D&D game, and he would run our D&D games even throughout college. And at this point, he has some kids. He's, like his oldest daughter's 18 or whatever, or 19. And Bruce was always like how I pictured an adult as a gamer, where he loved D&D, he loved Magic, he loved games, but he also like was, he's an IT director. He, has a good relationship. He had kids. Like he did a lot of the like good adulting stuff. And I was like, wow, you can actually be adult, like games, and still, do a good job with your responsibilities. And a lot of how I wanted to parent, I actually modeled after him, seeing how he raised his daughters. I think he did an awesome job. So I don't know, just those are like the life lessons. I got to admit, celebrities have never been my, like, I don't look up to them in that way. That's just not how I have been, I know some folks who like Kobe was like my favorite person or whatever. And that's great. Like if that's where you draw inspiration from, I think that is awesome. I'm not, in any way diminishing that. And that's just not like my heroes are people I spent tons of time with and looked up to and got to see their lives and them as people.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm generally the same on the celebrities thing, but there is one exception, and that's LeBron James. He's definitely a personal hero of mine. Not just because he's, a GOAT level basketball player, that doesn't hurt, but this is a dude that, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated when he was 16. And, when that happens, when you reach the type of fame and expectations on you that he did, it almost always ends really poorly at some point, right? I mean, you always hear like, oh yeah, now they're in and out of rehab, or they're, they completely
it's like
flamed
a child
out.
actor, right?
Child actor. It's the same type of stuff, right? And LeBron has not only lived up to the expectations of his career, which was already a long shot and difficult to do with, people are calling him the next Michael Jordan when he's a teenager. But this guy, he's just never stepped out of line. Like, he's just never had a scandal of any, it's all been like basketball related stuff. Who cares, right? He's married to the same person he was way back then. He's raised his kids. He supports them. He's out at their basketball games, their functions, whatever, doing that stuff. He started an entire school, right, called I Promise School, where the kids got to go to school from K through 12, and then even are sort of accompanied, to college. Like they teach them how to get into college and help them with that stuff. They provided practical things like bicycles for them and, underprivileged areas and stuff. And this was all him. I mean, if this guy didn't exist, none of this stuff would have come out. And I just don't know how you can take the criticism and the media and the overwhelming nature of his life and just everybody constantly picking apart, critiquing every single thing he's already done, and not just have some meltdown of some sort, or just, he went off the deep end or whatever. He just keeps on going, keeps his head on straight. And I really, really respect him for that. A couple of others are, my parents as well. My mom always just said, like, I want you to be a good person. I don't care like what you do for a living. I don't care if you make money or not. I don't care if, where you live. She's just like, she always emphasized that. And then my dad is like definitely my hero. He passed away in 2014, but he had a real way about him that if you knew him, you knew what it was. But he was just, he carried himself. He was an expert in automotive stuff. He worked at a carburetor shop for a long time. He was on a pit crew. Hold on. The value police were on their way over. They heard I got a 2-for-1 earlier on Arena. But anyway, and people would come from all around to have him tune up their cars and fix their cars, their race cars or their whatevers. And these are people that knew how to do a lot of this stuff themselves. And so they would come over, and I lived with my dad for a while when I was in my early 20s. I rented the basement from him. And so I was hanging around with him a lot. And these guys would come over, and they had just been like banging their head on this car, and it wouldn't tune up right, and it was running too rich, or there was too much gas, and they just couldn't. So they're like, oh, my dad's name was Lee. They're like, I got to call Lee. And they'd bring it over, and they'd just be like, dude, I don't know what the hell. I tried everything. I bought new ones of these. I had a guy come out, and my dad would just look at them and just listen to him and go, okay. And then he would just walk over to their car and like lift up the thing, and the dude standing there like, what do you see? What's going on? My dad just wouldn't say anything, and he'd reach in and then maybe like take a part out or just start working on something, go over to his bench, clean up something, work on something, whatever. And in 20 minutes, the thing would be running perfect. And the guy would just be like, what did you do? Like, what was wrong with it? How did you do this? And my dad would just be like, shrug. He wasn't interested in like having people pat him on the back. He wasn't, the type of person to be like, okay, so here's what I did. I took this apart, which is, I'm more built like that. Like I'd want to explain it. He just didn't have that gear at all. And he would just be like, yeah, there you go. And then they'd want to give him money, and he'd be like, get out of here. And then they would just leave. And it would be like every other week somebody would come by like that. And I remember at his memorial service, that's what people talked about. They talked about his demeanor and like how he could just sort of effortlessly fix stuff that people couldn't, and so he's always been my hero for that. The others, are, when it comes to the watch side of things, there's one of the most famous watchmaker personalities, people from the last like few hundred years. His name is George Daniels. He's an English watchmaker, and I really have a lot of respect for him. I read his autobiography. I watched a couple of documentaries on him and stuff. And basically what he did is, he kind of recognized that the art of making watches like by hand had really kind of faded and become like the domain of factories, like mass production. And he recognized that there was something special about something that was handmade by like one person, and that wasn't the way that it was really being done. And so he decided, I want to learn how to make a watch. And so he started like reading books from the 17 and 1800s and stuff about the manufacturing techniques they had then. And he set himself out to make one. And he literally taught himself and bought the machines and made the machines he couldn't buy and whatever to make it himself. It's now called the Daniels method, which is doing it yourself, where you basically learn. He outlines 32 different skills that you have to master before you can take something from like a hunk of metal into a working watch. And he wrote an entire book, which I have as well. It's way over my head as far as skill set stuff goes. But this guy did that, and he did it from scratch. And I really admire people who just say, you know what, I'm going to figure this out on my own. I'm going to just sit down and I'm going to do this over and over and over and over and over again until I get stuff that I want. Now any watch that he made over his lifetime's worth millions. They're just some of the most sought after stuff. But I like people that set out to do something on their own and aren't afraid to say, well, I don't know how to do that. Well, I'm going to teach myself, or I'm going to figure it out. So there you go. Good question, John. We could probably do an entire episode on it. We just did about half of one. So there you go. Let's crack a pack. Get back to Magic here. First card out is Scoured Barrens. That's the black-white gain land. Next is Era of Enlightenment. That's the one in a white that saga that scries 2, then gains 2, then flips into a 2/2 first strike. I love this card. I put it into every white deck. I'll just jam as many of these as I can get.
I mean, that's just basically sagas, right?
True. And this to me is a perfect bread and butter, like 2-drop saga.
Yeah. I mean, it's just the saga cards are just very, very good. Like, yeah. The red has a couple stinkers, I guess, but like even then, I don't know. Like when we're doing like these deck outlines, part of what we're doing today, a lot of it is like, what are the key commons and uncommons? Like, well, all the sagas, let's start with there. And then.
Yeah, it is weird, isn't it? It's like, put all of these like we're going to talk about artifacts, put these artifacts in your deck. You want to have as many artifacts as possible, unless of course you open a saga, right? And then it's like, you just jam every one of the on-color sagas. And the interesting thing about Era of Enlightenment is it's actually on the lower end of power for the first 2 modes, meaning that it doesn't directly give you a card, where most of them actually do result in like actual card advantage. This one's scry 2, then gain 2 life, which you could argue is worth about a card, but I mean, it isn't an actual card where basically all of the others give you that. But this one does flip into something a little better than the others on at the common level, at least in a 2/2 first striker, and it's close enough to a card. Like I said, I play about as many of these as I pick up. Tempered in Solitude is, it's a foil. Okay, so we got a foil here. That's why it's an uncommon. 1 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Where are you at on Tempered in Solitude?
I really haven't been that impressed with it, honestly. Like, it looked like it was going to be a solid way to get some extra cards, but it's kind of awkward to make it all work. Like, you need to have one creature, and you don't want to be in a position where like you really would want to attack with more creatures, but you're not able to. You need enough cheap cards. It often doesn't work the turn you play it. Like, there's just a lot going on here that makes me not super high on Tempered Solitude.
Yeah, same. I see the upside. It is definitely there. I have lost to this card where like we kind of stalled out and then they just, pecked me with a 1/1 and basically drew two cards a turn for the rest of the game. So it's not impossible. But the second point you brought up is the one that I've ran into the most and why I've shied away from playing the card, which is like sometimes you just end up with like 2 4/4s and they have a 3/3 and you just want to slam on them and you draw Tempered in Solitude and you're like, am I really supposed to take the pedal off the gas here and start to like try to accrue card advantage for a longer game? And the answer in a lot of these red decks is just no. You're supposed to slam, Yeah. So if there's a card that doesn't help you do that, it really can take away. Nezumi Blade Blesser is next. That's a 2 and a black 3/2 that gets Death Touch as long as you control an artifact, and Menace Menace as long as you've got an enchantment.
Filler. I mean,
fine,
it's,
right?
it's fine, but it's not something that I'm going to prioritize in any way.
Aki Ronin, 1 and a red, 1/3. Whenever Samurai Warrior you control attacks alone, you may rummage, discard a card, then draw a card.
Lower end playable. Part of it is like I've really started to not want to start with red cards if I can avoid it.
Oh, okay.
I have found red to be not that great.
I think it is the worst color, but they are mercifully bunched up this time. Like it isn't like you can't play red. It's just, it happens to perform the worst. Aki Ronin has been the low end of filler for me. I have not ever prioritized it and I've never really been impressed by it. No. You Are Already Dead. Black instant destroy target creature that is dealt damage this turn, draw a card. Not sure where I'm supposed to be on You Are Already Dead. It fits. It makes sense. Like in a ninja's archetype, there's a lot of expendable creatures like beetles and stuff that you can just sort of throw in there. And then they have to decide, do I want to block this and then risk getting You Are Already Deaded? Or do I want to let it through and risk, God forbid, they ninja it back to their hand and then replay it? But I have found that it's difficult to find slots for You Are Already Dead. That's not really a knock on the card itself, but I mean, I'm just like, I'm not really going to replace like a decent ninja with it. I'm not going to replace an actual removal spell with it very often. And so it ends up not making the cut for me very often, even though I can see its place.
I mean, the place where I think you really do want it is when you're like blue-black ninjas with 2 virus beetles and a network disruptor, and you're just like, yeah, this is going to be good. You put this in your white-black like mid-range deck, often it's just going to rot in your hand. And that's always pretty awkward because you can't cycle it. That's just not how it works,
Right, exactly. Careful Cultivation, that's 2 and a green enchantment, aura that enchants an artifact or creature. The permanent gets +1/+3, and it has reach, and you can put it on a vehicle. And then it channels into basically a Llanowar elf that's a human.
Yeah, I mean, this card's solid. It's good acceleration. One thing that's a little annoying, it always trips me up, is when you channel it, you don't get an enchantment.
Oh, it's not right. It's just a human monk. Yeah, that's a little annoying.
Yeah,
but you can put that card in your deck. Wanderer's Intervention, 1 and a white instant. It does 4 damage to attacking or blocking creature. I put one of these in my deck. It's fine.
Fine, but nothing exciting.
No, and they do get a little worse too in multiples. Moonsnare Prototype. We're going to talk about this one in the artifacts deck as well. And we've kind of checked in on this card a few times. This is the blue artifact that lets you tap it and an untapped artifact you control to add a colorless, or you can channel it for 4 and a blue to have the owner of target permanent put it on the top or bottom of their library. So last time you were saying you were initially a little higher on it and then you were kind of coming down a bit on it. Where are you at now?
I haven't been liking it too much.
Okay.
look, there are times when it is good. Look, there are draws where it can be quite strong, but the times when it's not good have outweighed that enough. And I think what happened is I had good experiences the first couple times I played with it.
Yeah.
And then, reality set in, and
Yeah,
I would like
the light of day shone down on it. Yeah, I mean, that happens.
In theory, it's like if you play it turn one and have a good curve with it, it can be good. And that part is true. And if you draw it off the top when you have, 7 lands in play, you can just cycle it or channel it. You get a card and it works out all right. The issue is when you draw it turn 3, you're not sure if you should play it or not, but you're not that close to channeling it. And that has happened to me enough times where it's like, well, I guess I should hold this because I'll probably channel it. Then you kind of wish you'd played it and like, gosh, I should have played it last turn. Now this turn's awkward. Or you play it and 2 turns later, you have 7 lands and 2 of these in play and you're just, or 1 of these and they're just like, yeah, I should have channeled it. So not high on the prototype anymore.
Peerless Samurai is 2 and a red for a 2/3 menace, and whenever Samurai or Warrior you control attacks alone, the next spell you cast costs 1 less to cast.
Yeah, I mean,
more filler.
Card, again, playable, but filler.
Yeah, see. Searchlight Companion, 3 mana, 1/1 artifact creature with flying, and it makes a 1/1 not artifact creature token spirit thing.
Yeah, I like this one.
Me too.
It's at its best in the ninja deck, but it does put an artifact into play, puts a flyer into play for equipment, can do some good stuff. Like it was pretty good in your I hate to mention it, but your showdown deck that had Eater of Virtue. It was very good combo at that.
Yeah, so this is also one of those sort of patchwork cards that we talk about where they it kind of fills in the gaps for a few different archetypes, and it's seen pretty extensive play. Rest of the uncommons. First one is Historian's Wisdom. That's the 2 and a green enchantment aura that enchants an artifact or creature. And when it enters the battlefield, if enchanted permanent is a creature with the greatest power among creatures on the battlefield, you draw a card and the creature or permanent gets +2/+1.
I've actually liked this card. I did, I haven't played it with it a ton, but it's been all right. Like an enchantment that can bounce is really nice.
That you can bounce?
Like you can bounce this for value because you play it, you draw a card, you get it back with Geothermal Kami, you play it again, you draw a card. That can be pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, just got to make sure the way is clear for cards like that. Okiba Salvage's Nexus of 4 and a black sorcery. Turn target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then put 2/+1/+1 counters on that permanent if you control an artifact and an enchantment.
It's fine. I mean,
is this fine? I just never play it.
The problem is it doesn't always have a target like Zombifies always have that, right?
Yeah.
But in the decks that consistently get 2/+1/+1 counters, first of all, that's good. That's just a good card. If it was straight up 5 mana, 2/+1/+1 counters on a Zombify, you'd be pretty interested, right?
Yes.
The second is decks that tend to utilize this have solid like ETBs or good creatures you want to recur a decent amount of the time, like is what I found. So I like this in the black-white deck and basically, or a deck that just has a good mix naturally, but generally don't love it outside of that. I mean, right now I'm looking at literally I probably take Scoured Barrens out of this pack so far. So
right. So let me look. So you would take, what would you take right now?
The black-white land is what I would take.
Okay, I would take Era of Enlightenment over that.
That's the second card I would take.
Yeah, but it's close. Yeah. This pack sucks. Wow,
so
I did not realize
it's not
how
like
bad
we're flooded with action here.
Yeah, next is, wow, I hadn't really recapped. That's terrible. Bronze Plate Boar. This is a 2 and a red 3/2 trampler, but you can reconfigure it for 5, and the creature gets +3/+2 and trample.
Well, this is where your color preferences come in. I think Bronze Plate Boar is the best card we've seen so far. I would also take either the land or Era of Enlightenment over it.
Because you would prefer to avoid red.
I haven't had good experiences starting with red. So the way I kind of look at it is, what are your different off-ramps when you start with a thing? When you start with Era of Enlightenment, obviously you can be white-green. That can be good. Yep. Definitely great in white-black.
Yep.
Fine in white-blue. That's a color combination I don't mind. And then white-red is probably the bottom of the heap. If you start with Bronze Plate Boar, it's good in the artifact deck. I do like that deck. So, red, blue, red, black, that sort of thing. I still haven't really liked red, white all that much. No. Every color combination is draftable. Like we're not talking undraftable here. And red, green is not one I've loved either. So you just have fewer places you can go. And the biggest knock against the artifact deck is if you pick up a powerful enabler early, which Bronze Plate Boar is not. This is just a good card. If you pick up, one of the reasons, like a Patchwork Automaton or something along those lines, then it's like, okay, I'm getting paid off for this. I'm going to go this direction. If you pick up random artifacts, like you don't know that you're going to get paid off for being artifacts. So like,
yes,
I don't like starting in that direction, but
yes,
luckily for us, the rares exist.
Yeah. And that's Surge Hacker Mech. This is the 4-mana 5/5 menace vehicle with crew 4. But the actual most important thing is that when it ETBs, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles you control to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So you get like a sort of a mediocre vehicle, right? Crew 4 is just kind of huge, but you do get a 5/5 menace out of it. But it does 2 damage to anything when it ETBs for 4. And sometimes it's even more. Sometimes it's 4 damage or could even be 6 in some scenarios. I've liked this card. It's never blown me away. I've never been like, holy crap. But it's like, yeah, no, it leaves enough of a real card behind after often killing something. There's a lot of low toughness stuff in this set. You know, this is why the Umezawa, saga is so popular. This thing actually kills a ton of creatures that you actually care about. So I would take the mech here.
Yeah, it's just got like artifact synergies.
Yeah.
If you can bounce it, it does some good work. And then also just, even though crew 4 for a 5/5 isn't like the best conversion rate, making 2 of your 2/2s effectively attack as a 5/5 menace, that's pretty real. So plus it's colorless. This can go in any deck. So I'm in for Surge Hacker Mech. That looks good. Seems
good. And that was kind of the savior there too, because that was looking like a very sketchy pack up until then. Okay, so there's our Cracker pack. Let's talk about the Arena Open and the Lords of Limited Resources Showdown as well, because we did play both of those over the course of the weekend. We'll start with the Arena Open. How did day one go for you?
So
you making it rain over there?
Well, I got there first of all in my first bullet, which was nice.
Very nice.
Because that doesn't always happen for certainly. And then day 2, I drafted a blue-black ninjas deck that had, no rares except for 1,000 Face Shadow.
Which might as well be an uncommon.
Right. And it was like, okay, but I did have 2 Modern Ages and a Reckoner Raid and a Life of Toshiro Umezawa. So I had some good low drop things, plus like 2 Network Disruptors, 2 Moon Circuit Hackers. I was like, yeah, this is looking good.
Okay.
And I had 2 copies of Naomi Pillar of Order in my sideboard, the black-white 4/4 that makes a 2/2 if you have Artifact and Enchantment. And I had a black-white duel and a blue-black duel.
Oh, okay.
So in my first 3 rounds, I sided in Naomi as best of 3, right? Every time, because I kept playing against decks that were like trying to attrition me, and that card's great when that's happening. Because I had a bunch of artifacts and enchantments. So then for the next 5 matches or whatever, I guess it was, I just main decked the Naomis. I just splashed white. So
you can change. I didn't know you could change your deck in between.
So I ended up playing a mana base of the 2 dual lands, a black white and a blue white. Or sorry, a black white and a blue black, 2 plains, and then like it was like 6/7 in terms of Swamps Islands or something like that. And I ended up going 6-2, winning $1,000. Was pretty happy about that.
Congrats.
Lost a heartbreaker, in the last match to not win another 1,000. But basically, the worst match to lose is the match playing for $1,000. Once you've won that match, like you walk away, it's like, yes, I wish I had won the second match that was also playing for $1,000. But winning $1,000 playing Magic the Gathering over 2 days from the comfort of your home, like the Arena Opens really do everything I want out of a Magic tournament except for the seeing your friends part, which to be fair is a big part of it, but they are so easy. And so I had a great time. I do think that our criticism still stands of playing the same draft deck 8 best of 3 matches in a row is a bit much.
It is a bit much. And it also feels a little hopeless. If you don't have a good deck, right? You're just like, how am I ever going to win? Where if you need to win 3, even a bad deck, you could say, you know what? My opponent could do this. Maybe I'll draw the good half of my deck,
My proposal, I mean, again, I haven't thought through all the back end kind of results of this or implications is if you get to 4 wins, which means you have to be 4-0 or 4-1, you get to draft again.
Yeah.
And, sometimes that means you'll be 4-1, draft again, lose your first round, and you'll be done. And yeah, sure, I get how that could be annoying. But doesn't it give you that little like halfway check-in? Like when you're playing a Mario level and you get to the little flag where now you're halfway in and you restart from that spawn point. Like You draft that bad deck, Marshall, you're 2-1. You're like, if I go 2-0, I get to draft again. Maybe I can rattle off some wins.
Totally. And it gives you that hope where if you end up with a bad deck and you're facing down, trying to get to 6 wins minimum, it's a tall order. I don't think you're really looking at that like, let's do it. It's just, if you're realistic, you're like, this is not going to happen. Anyway, my day one, I drafted I built a red-green deck that I really didn't like. And I went 3-0, and then I had to run an errand, and I was texting with my friend Jay, and I was like, I just know it's going to be the maximum pain, like, because this deck is not good, and I don't know how I'm really 3-0 with it. And it wasn't quite maximum pain, but I did bonk out with that one. I think I got to 4 wins. And then, so then I opened another pool, and my deck was actually worse somehow. And I went 3-3 with that. And I was like, wow, okay, these decks have not been good. And like, I don't know, I wasn't playing super great. So I'm like, yeah, this is not great. But I decided, okay, I'll do another one. And I jump in and I just opened a sweet blue-black pool, like not even splashed. Like it was just really, really good. Like it was so much better than the other decks. And I was like, I am definitely going to get to 7 with this. And I got to 3-0 with it. And I was just locking it up, in my head. And I did. I got to, I think I went 7-1, but the deck was so sweet that there was just no way I was going to, I did not think I was going to lose with it. And so then I made kind of a mistake. So I woke up at 7:30. I set my alarm, woke up at 7:30 to register and then go back to sleep. But when I registered, I like jumped into the queue somehow. I don't know if I like hit the 2 buttons or something like that or whatever. I didn't know exactly. I was half asleep. And then it was like, ready for your draft. And I'm like, oh no. So I'm like, well, I better wake up. And so, I did my draft. And I just hated my deck. I just thought it was terrible. I felt I had effectively no removal, which isn't necessarily the worst in this format. If you have like a really solid plan, you can kind of just outdo whatever they're doing, but I didn't. And, so I felt pretty discouraged. I'm just like, this is going to be so difficult to get 6 wins with. And I lost my first match and just got annihilated. Like it was like, I never was even close to being in it. And I cast all my spells. Like it wasn't like I was mana screwed. And then I won the next round and I'm just like, but my opponent did not play well. And I was just like, yeah, that is not how this is going to go. And then I lost the next round and I was out. So fair enough. I think even if we had the Luis rules with the draft of 4, I think I would have still felt like I was a long shot. Just my deck sucked. I mean, it was that simple. I tried to do artifact sub theme and I ended up moving in on black red. I opened Hidetsugu and took it, which is pretty good card. And then the next pack was pretty weak, and I took what is it called? Scrapyard Smelt, whatever, the 3 mana 3/3 that lets you sack artifacts.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Which is fine. It's like whatever. It was just the best card out of the pack. And then I ended up sticking into black red, and I was leaning towards artifacts, and it ended up being a little bit open. I got a Sakenzen Smelter and I got a Dragonspark Reactor, and I really like the Smelter and I kind of like the Dragonspark Reactor, but like you got to be all in and I want more of them. And then I didn't see any more payoffs. So that was it. It was just like, well, this is what this is going to be. And I couldn't make it, but, I want to reiterate what you said. It is still really awesome just to have the chance to do any of that, even if I didn't make the money. And, I honestly, I hope that they just say, yeah, every set now there's a limited arena open, just like there might be a constructed one, there might not, but there's just always a limited one, and just do that every set. I would just, if that became part of our set cycle, right, where it was just like, oh yeah, I remember the blah, 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 open, and we just assume that there's going to be one for every set. I would love that. That would be great. What about the LOL showdown? That
one was less great. So coming in, we were 5-2. We had won 5, they had won 2, but the match count's actually closer, which means that the match count, some might say the match count's a more true representation. Yeah. I think it's because our seasoned veterans on our team for team drafts know when to give up matches and when to close them.
That's right. So, we know how to win when we need to win. Right.
Exactly.
We conserve our energy.
The total showdown count is actually the more accurate predictor.
It is,
but it didn't go well. There was a couple things that went wrong. First thing first, I went 0-3. Pretty hard to complain when you go 0-3. I got murdered. I think my deck was okay. It was a kind of like multicolor green based, like green blue base, splashing white for Farewell and red for the Kiki-Jiki Saga, the Fable, the Mirror Breaker, which are both fantastic cards.
Yeah, that seemed fine. Your deck seemed fine to me.
I thought it was fine, but I got mauled. I just lost. You know, their decks were great, and then I just had my deck was a little susceptible to flood. It had needed more sources of card advantage. It kind of ran into the problem of like they dealt with one of my like 3 or 4. Like I had 3 good rares because I also had the Springleaf 6/5 that when it hits them you get a regrowth.
Oh yeah, that thing's sweet.
But my stuff, like Mr. Metronome had a black-white deck full of removal, just killed all my stuff, and I didn't draw Farewell, and then I had no real way to convert there. BK didn't play much with the set beforehand, which generally, you know, that's kind of his calling card, right? That's what he does. Mm-hmm. But that works less well in this set because the set not only is very complicated, but there's also a lot of weird stuff like, is this creature an artifact? Is this creature an enchantment? What does that mean? What types does this not work on? And like,
totally,
he was not like thrilled with how he played. So, and then you drafted what I thought was a pretty good blue-white deck. And then I don't know. Sometimes like things don't work out. They had on balance better decks, and they certainly were able to use that to their advantage. They did a great job crushing us, and we ended up. It was actually funny. We ended up going into the last round 2-4 in match count, so we had to sweep. All of us went to game 3. So there was a point where we're all in game 3. If we all 3 win, we win the draft. Yeah. Then we all lost. So it was a 2-7 landslide loss. So
yeah, it is funny because that's another good example of going back to what you said before about the match count of, you know, we were up 5-2, but it's actually way closer than that. And this one was actually a little closer. They still beat us pretty solidly anyway. Like even with the closeness there, I definitely felt my deck felt 100% helpless against 2 of the matchups, like particularly Tupperware's deck. I mean, I'm playing blue-white ninjas, which isn't even a thing. And I have like what looks like quite a good start, and he plays the Grove Archer or whatever. And I'm like, wow, I have one way to deal with that in my deck. Then he plays another one. Then he plays the 1/3 Kappa Turtle and then puts the Reach enchantment on it. So he has a 2/6 and 2 3/3 reaches, and I have a bunch of like moths or whatever. I'm like, this is never going to go well for me. I like chop through some of it. And then he used the 2 and a green, like get 2 things back from the yard to get back 2 Grove Archers against my, I'm like, I am never, ever going to win. I did manage to scrap out 1 match win against Cord in a bizarre situation. I actually found myself in a spot that I didn't know what the rule was, and I just didn't even know what I was supposed to do because I had the Kieran that makes it so that you can't lose the game if it's attached to something. And I actually had a lethal attack where I was at 0, but I couldn't lose because of the Kieran. But I could get him to 0, but lose the Kieran in that combat. And I'm like, I don't know what happens. Is it a draw? Do I win? Does he win? And so I decided to not go for it just because I didn't know, and I was in an advantageous position anyway. And so I attacked, and he ended up just scooping. I'm not sure if he just didn't have outs at that point or if the writing was on the wall or whatever. I was going to win the next turn with what I had. But I still actually don't know. A level 2 judge came in and said that I would win the next round after that. But I asked you, and you're like, I don't know. And you usually really know the rules.
What was you would win, but I'm not. You know, I can't.
Yeah,
I can't say that I'm certain about that.
Yeah. But anyway, congrats to the Lords. They drubbed us proper.
Yeah, I mean, I really like it. Like, it's still, you know, between that and Arena Open, we got to play some limited matches that I care about. And you know me, I just want to care about the outcome of the things I'm participating in.
Totally.
Like, I want to feel it when I win and feel it when I lose. And the showdowns do that. When I win, I'm happy. And when I lose, I feel bad. Like, not in a like, oh, I wish I didn't do that way, but in a like, oh, I felt that way. Got to get him next time, you know?
Yeah.
Like, stakes, you know, stakes and stakes.
So last year for the Limmies, you took home worst draft pick of the year by passing that stupid Furia's Vengeance or whatever.
BK's on the hook now.
So BK's now like the front runner.
Oni Cult Anvil over AO, the White Dragon, where AO got straight to Cord, who was just playing white already, and then B, Oni Cult Anvil would have wheeled.
Yeah. Oh God. Come on, BK.
Yeah.
All right.
He was not on his game.
Yeah, he was not, but that's okay. We still love him. Okay. Let's get into these archetypes. We've got a few to cover for this episode. First one is going to be the Artifacts deck, which is a combination of blue, red, and or black, and you can actually mix and match a fair bit here. The most natural home, though, is blue, red, and red, black. Like those both directly support artifacts. Like both of the signpost uncommons for those are artifact related cards. So those usually will be your core, and then you can add on the third color if it makes sense. But bottom line is that there's a lot of artifact related synergies and payoffs, but you just have to get enough of those payoffs to justify surrounding them with enough artifacts as you can. That's kind of the synopsis for the deck. How do you get into it? You start with the payoffs. We talked about this in the Crack-A-Pack, but you can pick up a bunch of random artifact, like decent artifact cards. But those are not what make the artifact deck sing. You need the payoff. So you really would prefer that over the first 1 to 3 picks or whatever, that you're already starting to pick up a few of those artifact payoffs so that then you can backfill with artifacts and pick up any payoffs that might get opened up or passed to you over the next 2 packs.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those classic, threshold decks or whatever, like critical mass decks where
yes.
Here's a good way to approach it. When I draft this deck and I'm looking and arena plus the new sets, you get lots of playables. That's just kind of how these things work, right? And I'm like, all right, I got to cut 7 cards. And I look, all right, let's start. What are all my non-artifacts? I'll start there. And then you cut like 4 of those. And then you got to play a couple. You can't cut all your commies, flares, or whatever. You do need some removal. And then you're like, all right, what are my weakest artifacts? But you really do want to play like 18 artifacts if you can get away with it, because you want it so your Patchwork Automaton, when you draw it in your opening hand, is a 7/7.
Yes.
You want it so you're always discarding artifact to thirst. You want it so if you untap with Replication Specialist, you win the game.
Yes.
And that's kind of how this works. And the cool thing, and this is what makes draft formats good, is sometimes you're in this deck and you're like, oh, thank God, I got another experimental synthesizer to go with all my artifact synergies. I got a 5th pick Patchwork Automaton in pack 3. I'm really I'm happy, like enthusiastic Mechanaut. I got one of those, and other people aren't even looking at these cards.
Yeah, and
you're just like snapping them up. I would first pick this card that you wouldn't 10th pick.
Yes,
that's what makes draft great.
Yes,
because if every card is just equally good or bad for everyone, it's like imagine a draft format that there's Lightning Bolt, Shock, 1 mana deal 1, and 1 mana deal 4. Well, you always take the 1 mana deal 4,
right?
And then you take the Lightning Bolt, and then you take the Shock, and then you take the deal 1.
And it's 2 on rails, and it makes
it's just
it too
not
repetitive.
Fun. Whereas this is great, and the good way to look at it is like, if you don't have a good artifact to pick, you can look at your non-artifacts, but generally you should be looking at artifacts above basically everything else.
Right. And I want to reemphasize the payoffs part. There have been some critical mass decks that we've had, particularly tribal ones, that are cards care about how many other types of cards you have fairly frequently, where it's like, hey, if it's an elf, just take it and it'll all kind of work out. This is a little more driven towards the payoffs. Like if you have an artifacts deck that doesn't have these payoffs that we're about to talk about, then you just have a deck. Like Virus Beetle doesn't care that it's an artifact, right? And it doesn't care how many other artifacts you have. And when you go down the list of commons, that's the case. It's the specific payoffs like the Patchwork Automaton, and we made a list of them. We'll talk about them in a minute, that you do need. The good news is there's a lot of those, and they vary in power. But I mean, if you can, sprinkle in enough of those, then you've got a deck. So let's talk about the key commons for the deck. And before we talk about the commons or uncommons for any of these, we do have to put kind of a disclaimer on, because of how powerful the sagas are in this set, that they kind of usurp any of these, right? Like it's like, I mean, maybe you need to take the artifact payoff over it, but if it's early in the draft, like you're just not getting me to pass, some of the, especially uncommon, but even many of the common sagas, if they're on color.
Yeah. When I'm in the, artifact deck and I see a Modern Age, it's like, well, this even digs me to more artifacts. It lets me trade lands for artifacts. Like, yeah, that's going to be good. It's not like I'm passing Behold the Unspeakable. Like that card's ridiculous.
Exactly. So there you go. So keep that in mind, that it's okay to go for raw power level when you need to. When you get to pack 2 and pack 3, it does get interesting, right? Because sometimes you have all the artifacts and all the stuff and you really need a payoff, and you open up one of those cards and then you start talking yourself into wheeling it or whatever. And that's where things get interesting. But let's talk about the commons here. Some of the commons, right? Bread and butter stuff that fills in your artifact count. I think the best card is probably Virus Beetle. Like that's the card that I am willing to take early. that I'll play as many as I can get of, and that just are almost never bad.
Yeah, it's funny. Virus Beetle, Experimental Synthesizer, Network Disruptor are all cards in that theme. And that actually brings us to a kind of point before we even get into this about this deck, which is I have tended to be either red-black or red-blue or red-blue/black.
Mm-hmm.
Or the three ways. I haven't actually drafted blue-black artifacts because I think too many of the cheap artifacts and the payoffs are in red. That's just one of Red's themes.
It's also the bread and butter cards. Unstoppable Ogre, we'll talk about them, but yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so when we say like key common, Virus Beetle, Network Disruptor, Experimental Synthesizer, like that's three different colors. It doesn't mean you should make, you first pick a Beetle, then you take a Synthesizer, then you take a Network Disruptor and you're doing it. It's more like one of these three cards, or two of these three cards tend to fit really well in your deck, and then whatever your third color is, you won't end up either. You're not splashing any of these cards really, though. I actually have splashed Virus Beetle before.
Yeah, I have two. I have two. But and another interesting note for that is that red is the anchor between the two color pairs that I mentioned before that have the signposts, right? That, the Mechanaut and the Anvil both share red. So red ends up being the focal point a lot of times for these decks. And it's because you get cards like Ironhoof Boar, which, like, if you can make a little cheaper, is very good. Simian Sling, which isn't a particularly great card, but it's 1 mana and it's an artifact, and it's also a creature that does something. Unstoppable Ogre has power and toughness, and you can get it back with the Kami or whatever. Voltage Surge is pretty good, and this is a deck where Voltage Surge can do 4 damage if you need it to, and that makes it pretty dang good. Ninja's Kunai, playable removal spell that also happens to be an artifact, so that's not bad. We talked about Searchlight Companion. You can put Undercity Scrounger in a deck like this. Look, it's not a great card, but it does produce artifacts, and it can even produce numerous or multiple artifacts that are good for sacking, feeding to other stuff. Sky Swimmer Koi, right? This has a natural artifact synergy built into it. Two that I did want to ask you about, or actually one of them we already talked about with the Moonsnare prototype, but what about Iron Apprentice? That's the 1 mana 1/1 that dies. You can put the counter on something that's an artifact. Do you put that in these decks?
Yeah, I pretty frequently play that card.
Okay.
It's less good than Disruptor or Virus Beetle when it comes to like cheap 1/1s, but still a perfectly fine card. Like, your goal is to play like 16 or 15 lands, depending on what other things you've got going on. Because things like the Ecological Terrarium are really good in this deck because they get you a land and an artifact, help you be 3 colors, etc.
Yeah, let's put that on the list.
Some number of things you want here are just cheap artifacts, and the little Iron Buddy does the thing.
Okay, so there you go. But as you can see, like if I told you, all right, Luis, here's your deck. You've got a Synthesizer, an Ironhoof Boar, a Simian Sling, 2 Unstoppable Ogres, a Ninja's, you're like, okay, but where are we going with this, right? You need the payoff. So here's some of the payoffs that you can get. Replication Specialist. That's a 4 and a blue 3/4 flyer that copies artifacts when they ETB if you pay 1 and a blue. I mean, what you said, Luis, sums it up perfectly. I want to play this card, cross my fingers I get to untap with it, and then be like, okay, I win. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to set up with it. And that happens. 100% that can happen with this card. It is extremely powerful. You can copy almost any artifact off of it. Thirst for Knowledge. Look, it just gets a minor bump because you basically always get to discard like an artifact and keep the other 2 cards. But like Sokenzen Smelter, love this card in this deck, right? You can pay 1 on your combat step to cash in an artifact and turn it into a 3/1 with haste that just sticks around. Like, you can turn treasures into it. You can turn Virus Beetles into it that have already done their thing. If you end up with the Moonsnare prototype, hey, let's upgrade it into a 3/1. And if this thing sits on the battlefield for a few turns, you can have quite a little army going of 3/1s as well.
Yeah, I like the Sokenzen Smelter quite a bit. I found that card to be super dangerous. And one of the things you want to look for in this deck as well is cheap ways to sacrifice the Experimental Synthesizer. Actually works out really nicely.
Yes.
Because it lets you, it's fine to spend 3 mana and sack it to make a 2/2 because that's just kind of what you got to do later. But when you're on 4 mana, spending 1 to sack it to a Smelter gives you so many more opportunities to play whatever you flip off it.
That's right. Yeah, really cool. You mentioned the Patchwork Automaton. Really great, like the fact that it protects itself.
Ward 2 is so
from
good.
Just not dying right away because it would be so fragile otherwise that by the time they actually have something that can kill it, you've built it up so that like it dodges some forms of removal a lot of the time. And it is one of the scarier 2-drops. Like if your opponent goes like, Mountain, Swamp, Patchwork Automaton, go, it's like, like that thing could be a 4/4 in a couple of turns and be smashing me. One of my favorites is the Oni Cult Anvil. This card's just really cool. Basically lets you sacrifice artifacts to drain your opponent for 1. But if an artifact leaves the battlefield on your turn, you get a 1/1 artifact creature. And so what you can do is if you have any artifact that leaves the battlefield, it even can be, something else, then you have the 1/1 and then you can tap the Oni Cult Anvil to sacrifice it to the anvil. And then it will replace itself on subsequent turns because it leaves the battlefield. You get a new one and you get to drain them. So your bare minimum is tap, drain your opponent for 1. And you can do other stuff with this too. Like, cause it triggers off of, it has a passive ability of making you those things. Then you can like block and sack. You can do all types of stuff. And it really gets annoying quickly for the opponent.
Oh yeah. Oni Cult Anvil. I mean, look, I wouldn't take it over a Dragon team draft, but it's certainly a great card. And one of the reasons to be in this deck, like, if you open on like Life of Toshiro Umezawa, right? Mm-hmm. And then next pick, it's like there's an Oni Cult Anvil. Look, I'm not against taking her in that spot. It is that good of a card. It
is. It's one of the great payoffs. Dragon Spark Reactor. That's the one in a red that gets its own counter to start with, but then it gets charge counters as you cast artifacts or as a ETB, and then you can pay 4 and sacrifice it to do that much damage to an opponent and a creature. It does have a very high upside, but it is slow. It is clunky. It is 4 mana to sack. They know that it's there. So this one is a little bit of a tier below. Like, I'd much rather have like an anvil or an automaton over a reactor, but I will play these in this deck. It still has the capability of charging up to 5 or 6 and killing their best creature plus doming them for a whole bunch if they don't deal with it. And that is powerful if you can surround it.
Yeah. The way I see Dragon Spark Reactor is not, this is one of the like, Oni Cult Anvil, Patchwork Automaton, I'm going to take this early type cards.
Yeah.
I see it as, if you're in this deck, you can wield this card and it'll be good in your deck. Because one of the big differences on turn 2, the reactor can be pretty threatening, but you still run into the problem of they let you build up 4 counters on it, then fade it into antiquity.
Totally.
And you got nothing out of the deal.
They arrest it. Yeah.
You draw it on turn 7, the card's not very good.
Right.
Whereas, a lot of these other cards, Oni Cult Anvil, I'm happy to draw that on turn 7. Patchwork Automaton, a little less so, but that one at least is going to get a lot of work done when you draw it early and still okay in the mid game. Dragon Spark Reactor is just like a cut below these things. Yeah. So obviously you can put it in these decks and it's fine, but don't be seeing this as a signal to be in this deck is the big difference.
Totally. Enthusiastic Mechanaut, we mentioned, that's a very good card for this. If you can get that thing down on turn 2, you can have some of those draws where you just kind of throw your whole hand on the table within the first like 4 turns of the game and your opponent's like, what the heck? Because unlike, elves or whatever, where you get to tap them for 1 extra mana to kind of turbo you up, the Enthusiastic Mechanaut just applies to all of your artifacts. So you can just dump your hand. Mech Titan Core at rare, it's really threatening. It's a difficult card to play because until you play it, you really have to read it carefully. It has you. This is the vehicle that lets you sacrifice it and 4 other artifact creatures, not just artifacts, but artifact creatures. And then you get like a 10/10 with a bunch of abilities. And then if it leaves, then all the stuff comes back. It's really powerful and threatening, but it is difficult to set up because you do have to have a heck of a lot of artifact creatures before your opponent's going to let you have 4 of them on the board with 5 mana available. But I've activated this multiple times and won every time I've activated it.
Yeah, no, it's actually good. It looks like one of those like, Magical Christmas Land cards. No, it's just a card that if you stack up enough artifacts, you do actually win. And
you do.
It's not dramatically different from sack 5, this plus 4 other artifacts win.
Well, you mean the fact that they have to be artifact creatures?
No, I'm saying like if the text on this was the same thing, but instead of getting the 10/10, you just won the game.
Gotcha.
How different would that be? And it would be better, obviously. That's stupid. But like, I have so far had this in one draft, and I won 3 games with it. Every time I activated it, I won.
Yeah.
Like, it is closer to that than a joke. So
yes,
keep this in mind. It's a real card.
And it is also like it's not it's not a desirable vehicle, but you can crew it up and block with it. Like it does actually do a thing. By the way, dude, this card I wanted to ask you about, because I kind of have shied away from it in the deck. It's Runaway Trash Bot, but that tweet by Juan, the one where he said, like, describe your ex in one Magic card, and he put this card. I was just dying, man. Like, who does that? It was so funny.
For those of you who don't know Juan, he's the genius behind the Channel Fireball Twitter account. He's our community manager, and he is
good.
So good. He's like my favorite. I love him. He also was the one who sent us the trophy for the Lords of Limited LR Showdown, and he sends me a new little trophy like plaque to put on the side. Sadly, I have to install the one where they won, but you know.
Oh yeah, that's tough. That's an extra bad beat for you. Do you play Runaway Trash Bot in your deck?
It's fine.
Okay.
It's surprisingly less good than you'd think because it doesn't really work with tokens. You know, they don't go to the graveyard and all that, but it's still pretty meaty. It's a good thing to equip too. It's got trample, so.
Okay. So there you go. So those are some of the payoffs that you can get. Some of the notes, right? We talked about most of it. Total number of artifacts matters. So you can use any of the playable artifact creatures to fill in the gaps. You are looking, you know, with most of these, they do care about how many artifacts you can put on the battlefield. So, you know, if you see, like, we didn't put them in like sort of the key commons class, but you know, name an artifact creature and you can probably put it in your deck and just be like, yeah, well, it has, you know, Moonfolk Puzzle Maker. Is it like tailor made for this deck? Not really, but you can certainly play it in the deck. It's an artifact creature, right? Sort of put it onto that scale. And for the most part, you can play any of them that are on there. One that we didn't put on because I'm not super high on it is Mnemonic Sphere. Look, it doesn't, you should probably still include this sometimes, but man, I just don't pick this card very highly anymore, even if it has the ability to cycle for just one mana. There are some cards that I'm just like, they just don't end up making the cut for me, you know?
Yeah, I think it's fine, but it's not a high priority because this deck does lean aggressive and you don't really want to like spend a bunch of time doing this instead of attacking them.
Right. As far as the breakdown goes, you know, I usually end up playing 16 lands in this deck. It's rare that I have really expensive stuff that I'm trying to actually cast, and there's usually ways to make your stuff cheaper. So I usually end up on 16 lands, you know, somewhere in the 12 to 14 creature range. You do still end up running a bunch of artifact creatures. I don't run any combat tricks in this deck, even though there are a couple playable ones in these colors, unless you count the boar, which I do run. But I'm not prioritizing combat tricks here. You know, 2, 3, 4 removal spells. You'll pick them up as they come in. This is where like you'll play black removal spells that aren't enchantment or aren't artifacts. You just do end up playing them. And then this deck kind of especially will end up with, you know, say 2 to 5 or 2 to 6 non-creature artifacts as well. You know, if you do run a Mnemonic Sphere, you can run it, you know, but the Anvil is a good example. The Dragonspark Reactor, stuff like that does make it in to this deck. And so you will end up with just kind of the dirtily artifacts, which once again does mean that you need to focus the rest of your cards on things that affect the board quite directly. Like if your first 2 turns are like the Anvil and a Dragonspark Reactor or something like that, you're not blocking much, right? So like your other stuff needs to do that. And then cards you should be valuing higher or lower, pretty obvious, just, you know, artifacts. So keep that simple. What about white-green enchantments? So
white-green enchantments is cool. It's a deck that often splashes, so it's almost white-green X enchantments. Mm-hmm. And basically what you're looking to do here is you're going to play a mid-range / controlling game with a bunch of enchantments and cards that care about enchantments. You know, that's like kind of the top level. The ways to get into this deck, well, Sagas, just like everyone else. I mean, this is the best Saga deck.
Because I know. It's like a deck that encourages me to play Sagas like more than I already want to. I'm in.
Well, because it's not only does it have access to a bunch of good Sagas, because red probably is the color that has the weakest Sagas, and this deck doesn't usually have too much red in it. It has the Hot Tub Kami, Geothermal Kami, and then Season of Renewal as 2 common ways to get extra value from your Sagas. Mm-hmm. And look, all I can say is when you play against this deck and they've got a couple Sagas and they play some of those, you trade off some cards, and at some point they're like, all right, their graveyard starts flashing as they're like thumbing through their graveyard on Arena. Then they cast Season of Renewal, getting back a creature and a Saga, and you're just like, so See, the way to get into this is to see early good sagas or enchantment payoffs like Jukai Naturalist, Generous Visitor, Kami of Transience. There's a bunch of good rare ones as well. And what you want to focus on with this deck is you want the good enchantments and the payoffs, but you also want ways to kind of get there. Like you mentioned, when you played against Lord Tupperware, Bamboo Grove Archer, right? Like that really stopped you. So like Fang of Shigeki, then Bamboo Grove Archer for early defense. Communal Spirits is awesome in this deck. This is the 1 green to look at the top 4, put an enchantment or land into your hand, because it lets you get away with playing 16 lands sometimes when you have multiple communes, but also just means you're not going to flood out because some of your mana sources can actually just become enchantments.
Totally.
And you're not going to get screwed because you keep a hand with 1 forest of plains and a commune. You can just cast it turn 1, get another land.
Yeah.
It's really hard to miss. So commune is great. Geothermal Kami, Careful Cultivation, just to ramp plus be an enchantment later if you can afford to cast it on someone. And then, like Season of Renewal is the real like hammer blow of like, we went long, now I'm going to cast this. Tales of Master Shishiro is great. Mm-hmm. A white card I specifically want to call it is Imperial Oath. This is a great Imperial Oath deck. It can just stall the game, cast Imperial Oath, get those 3 samurai, scry 3 to find another Oath or just a good enchantment or a season or whatever you want. And then Era of Enlightenment is so perfect because it's a cheap enchantment. The life gain and the scrying smooth out your early game, and then a 2/2 first strike does a pretty good job on the board. Spirited Companion's obviously absurd in this deck. Like, It's just a great card no matter what, but this is the 1/1 cantrip enchantment 1/1 that draws a card.
Yeah.
The payoffs for being in this deck, besides the fact that you often take, mana fixing and you can be multicolor, is it can fit all the sagas in and it can use them the best. It can find them with Commune. It can replay them with all its cards. Blossom Prancer, one of the best cards in the set. This is the 5 mana 4/4 reach that lets you cast Commune basically, or gets a creature or enchantment off the top of your deck for 4. You look at the top 5 cards or something, 6 cards. It's a lot of cards. And then Generous Visitor is great. The 1 mana 1/1 that puts a ++1 counter when you cast an enchantment. Weaver of Harmony, Kami of Transience at rare. So really good. Another side note for this deck is this is also the Shrine deck sometimes. Shrines not only are enchantments, but this is the deck where you have the white and green shrine and then you splash the red one, and it's not that hard to kind of get away with it. So the biggest fork in the road for this deck is, are you splashing or not? Because you don't have to. You can often just go white-green. But once you've kind of gone down the road, then all of a sudden the Tanuki gets a little more interesting. Grafted Growth gets a little more interesting. Random duels get more interesting. And you kind of have to prioritize those, but sometimes it's worth it. There's some really good cards you can end up splashing. And you kind of you won't always know till later in the draft, but trying to figure out whether you're splashing or not, it really just comes down to how much extra power you need. When I open Weaver of Harmony or Kami of Transience and, I'm going down, like white green is open, I try to not splash because I've already got some powerful cards. I want to cast my, Jukai Naturalist on turn 2. I don't want to draw a blue-black tap land or whatever.
Right.
But obviously, when you open good rares or, get pushed into splashing, this deck can handle that fairly well.
Would you describe it as like you're looking for a reason to splash?
It's kind of tricky. I think you do splash enough of the time that I would kind of go in and just like pick up random white-black tap lands or whatever. But once your deck hits a certain threshold of power or a bunch of communes, then I start becoming less interested in splashing. When I have 3 communes, I want to be able to play like 10 forests, 6 plains, and then just play those communes as duels, or as lands if I need them. Is a value deck. You're generally not that aggressive. Obviously, the deck is capable of some aggressive starts with the right cards, but for the most part, this deck is looking to go long. It's really not interested in vehicles. It's really not interested in like random creatures that aren't enchantment. You can deprioritize those. Like Imperial Oath is one of the kind of exceptions. That said, it's not the artifact deck that needs 18 artifacts and needs to draw 7 artifacts every game. If you draw 2 enchantments in a game, that can be fine as long as they're the right ones. It's really trying to go for more like you want to be able to bounce something with your Geothermal Kami or get back something with Season of Renewal. You don't need a critical mass to do that. You don't need that many. So the fact that it's enchantment based doesn't mean it's the same level as artifacts, which is cool. They play differently. They draft differently. And I really like this deck. This deck is very strong. It also can be blue-green base. Like if you get some Colossal Sky Turtles, Behold the Unspeakable, just go blue-green instead. But, obviously white-green is kind of the more normal path down here. Right.
Yeah, I'll tell you, going to what you said about sort of how it plays off on the aggression versus grindy versus mid-range, whatever. To me, the signature play of this deck is end step Season of Renewal. It's just like that to me defines what this deck is actually trying to do. So that is play stuff, get value, trade it off, and then buy 2 things back with Season on end step. It usually that the game swung, right? When you're like, okay, we got a good game here. They got a card in hand, maybe 2, we're all right. And then they go Season Renewal, get back my 2 best things out of the yard. And you're like, well, never mind, right? GG. Like I just spent my removal spell to kill your flipped Saga and you just bought it back. Or it's just like this, I'm never going to win now. I've just got buried.
Yeah. I mean, this deck is number 1 for, we play a long game, and I feel like it's been hopeless for a while.
Yep, exactly. I've been out of this game.
When you lose to the artifact deck or the ninja deck, like you lose, and it's done.
Yeah.
This is the deck where it's like, they're not killing me, but I can't really get through the damage, and they're looping Colossal Sky Turtle and Season of Renewal, which is a loop, by the way. You can continue to do that over and over again.
Yeah, I actually had a chance to draft that on my stream, and everybody yelled at me because I didn't. The Sky Turtle would have been off color, but the important part would have been in or whatever. And Louise talked about it on the show, and I was like, "Oh crap! Sorry, I missed it." What about the breakdown of the deck?
You're playing very, very few, like no combat tricks. Tameo Safekeeping might be an exception because if you have some high value creatures, this is like if I have a Generous Visitor and a Jukai Naturalist and a Weaver of Harmony or something. Yeah, I'll get the Safekeeping in. You want to play 16 or 17 lands because sometimes the communes can let you cut it down a little bit. You want to play a couple removal spells. You do like Wanderer's Intervention's fine here. Fang of Shigeki kind of counts as a removal spell, though it's also an enchantment, which is why it's nice. Same with Bamboo Grove Archer. But like you want cards that A, can help you survive early. That's what the intervention does. Or B, can help you kind of win. Like if they play something, a little bit heftier later, so that it's worth playing another couple removal spells. Like Master's Rebuke tends to be on the weaker side for this deck, unless you have enough fangs or sizable creatures. But Repel the Vile that exile a power 4 or greater, or an enchantment's good. Fall of Lord Konda's good. Fate into Antiquity is good too. And you don't actually need that many creatures. Your sagas are creatures, so you're probably this deck can easily play 10 creatures or something like that because you have sagas and Imperial Oath and whatnot. You don't need to go nuts on that.
Okay. Any other last notes here before we go to the ninjas?
No, I mean, I think that the saga deck or the enchantment deck can expand to like it can go in a bunch of different directions. So that's one that I would take. Like ninjas and artifacts are pretty focused linear decks. The enchantment deck's actually kind of the opposite, where like you can have a white-green ramp deck that actually doesn't even have that many enchantments, but plays a couple and still wants a Season of Renewal. So definitely a lot of flavors to this deck, which is cool. It makes you keep coming back.
Yeah, for sure. And as you mentioned, there are some quick starts, particularly around Generous Visitor. Like that is a scary card to see come down on turn 1. When your opponent plays that, it's like if you're not staring down at an immediate way to deal with it, like it can get completely out of hand. Same thing with Kami of Transience if they have one of those. What about Blue-Black Ninjas?
This one's cool. This is
I
think the trickiest deck to play with and against. This deck leads to some really intense game situations, which is great. That's part of what I love about the deck. It's an aggro/value deck that looks to start attacking early, pressure the opponent, and get value. It's not trying to kill you by turn 5, but it's trying to put you in a bad position by turn 5 and then use that to press the advantage. It's a very much like when you're ahead, this deck is just rolling.
Get ahead, stay ahead.
Cards like Network Disruptor and Moonsnare Specialist are just like perfect. They encapsulate what this deck's trying to do. The ways to get into this deck, find early sagas. The blue and black sagas, particularly Modern Age and Okiba Reckoner Raid, are just absurd for this deck because not only are they very cheap 1 and 2 mana, they give you these nice evasive creatures that also like being bounced.
Yes.
Like when you Reckoner Raid and then bounce the Reckoner Raid and then just get to play it again in the same turn, it's just like disgusting.
It is.
Also, there's good rare and uncommon ninjas that can kind of get you into it, but this is actually more of a common deck than any of the other ones. Actually, like you don't need. I guess the Arena Open deck, I had basically all commons, and it still played out pretty well. I tweeted out the deck, too, if you want to see it. Some of the key commons are Network Disruptor, Okiba Reckoner Raid, Modern Age, Virus Beetle's fantastic, Moon Circuit Hacker, Moonsnare Specialist. Here's a big one that I think the secret's kind of out on, but if not, you get some value here. Suit Up. This is the 2 and a blue instant. Make a creature or vehicle into a 4/5 artifact creature until end of turn and draw a card. I had 2 copies of that in my open deck, and they were awesome for me. I took them very highly. Yeah. And the reason is this is the deck that's like highest on your opponent must block you.
Yes.
So you attack them with a virus beetle, say. You've got your island, swamp untapped, and they have a 3/3. What are they going to do? It's like, well, if they don't block, then you Moonsnare Specialist or Moon Circuit Hacker or whatever, and they feel like an idiot. And if they do block and you cast Suit Up, you just got to use Suit Up to kill their 3/3, their 3-drop or 4-drop, and draw a card.
One. Yeah,
it just turns out drawing a card is just such a good effect. It takes what would have been a very low power level, low value card, and just amps it up to one of the best blue commons. And blue has a lot of good commons.
It's actually the second best blue common right now.
Yeah, in terms of win rate, right? So
correct.
Network Disruptor, I assume, is still the first.
I don't know. I didn't look.
Well, Network Disruptor is also just the games you open with Network Disruptor. It's like you guaranteed to get to Ninja in the first 3 turns or whatever, and then you have a Network Disruptor in your hand. I actually love so much that they put tap a creature or tap a permanent on Network Disruptor, because it means that when you top deck your 1-drop Ninja Enabler later, it still does exactly what the deck wants. It's not like when you draw it later, you don't get value. It still is like perfect. So
I do want to update. So it's actually the Modern Age is number 1.
Oh, I see.
But interestingly, Suit Up, Moon Circuit Hacker, and Network Disruptor are all effectively tied. They're within 0.2 percentage points of each other. So
yeah, Blue has a deep roster of really good commons. There's a reason that you want to start in blue in a lot of cases. Yeah. And the funny thing is the removal is also good. Twisted Embrace, Tambio's Completion, Lethal Exploit, but Suit Up is just better for you. It just does what you want more often. Also, sometimes it deals an extra 2 or 3 damage for lethal.
Yeah, that's true. That happens too.
For uncommon and rare payoff, again, Sagas, your new Life of Toshiro Umezawa doesn't get much better than that. Behold the Unspeakable, ninjaing that back. Thank you very much.
Done.
And then
that's really all I want to do ever, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Ninjaing back Behold is just like, that's another level. Silver for Master is quite good. It does a bunch of different stuff you want. And then Gravelighter, this is the 2 and a black 2/2 flyer. So when it ETBs, if nothing died, each player sacks a creature. And if something died, you draw a card. Both sides are really good. And you have a pretty good amount of control over which side you want to play out, because you can just save it. And it's really good to ninja back. So I've found this card to be great. It's especially good because this is the deck when you attack them with a 3/2, they block with their 3/3 because they don't want to get ninja. Then you cast Gravelighter and you draw a card. 3 mana 2/2 flying draw a card. That's just a joke. That's how good that card is.
Totally.
I've actually been pretty impressed with Thousand Face Shadow. It's not.
Oh yeah.
It's not a rare bomb of any sort, but it's a 1 mana 1/1 flyer. So playing it on turn 1 is just totally fine. It does what you need for the ninja deck. And it's not that hard to get 2 attackers where one gets through and you just make a copy and you get an ETB and you get some good value from it. So, and then Kaido Shigezuki, the Mythic Planeswalker, is good in the deck, though. That it's just a good card. So
yeah, and Satoru Umezawa is really awesome too.
Yeah, very solid. This deck plays out. So assume your opponent's going to block whenever possible, because they generally will against you. How can you exploit that? You were already dead. Suit Up are 2 big ways to do it. It also just means you get to force good trades. You get to attack with your 2/1 into their like slightly higher value 2/2 or 3/2. And a lot of the time they'll block. Obviously, if you're playing best of 3, it's game 3. You haven't shown them any ninjas. They might think, you're lying to me. You don't actually have ninjas. But just operate under that assumption. And then the cool thing is this is a tempo deck that also can make a lot of card advantage, or gain a lot of card advantage. So often you can play this deck where it's like, I got in early, I got an extra card out of my Moon Circuit Hacker, I played the Modern Age, so I'm not going to flood out. Your opponent's playing on the back foot and they're kind of thinking defensively, but you can kind of just stop attacking and start building up to whatever your late game is, because this deck can also do that. It doesn't really sacrifice that exactly. So a lot of cool stuff, really plays out nicely. And when it comes to the card breakdown, generally 16 or 17 lands, just like most decks. It can be 16 when it has a low curve. You want a lot of creatures. You want in the like 14 to 16 range in terms of creatures, because not only do you have all your ninjas, you also need creatures to make it so your ninjas can attack them, and get through. the combat tricks you want mostly suit up is the kind of the goal, and then a couple removal spells. Removal works great in this deck too.
Yeah, and you get the removal. You do. Like you said, you actually get the 2 4-mana enchantment based removal spells work very, very well as well. I love that deck. It's really fun to play, and it feels fairly balanced. Like it's not just like completely crushing, but when it gets rolling, it's really powerful too. So that's great. Let's talk about a couple of cards before we take off, Luis. We just mentioned Imperial Oath, but it's really a standout. Like at this point, Imperial Oath is kind of like what is going on here with this card. Like it has a bomb level game in hand win rate on 17 lands. It's got a 61.3 win rate at common. And it costs 6 mana, which normally those get filtered out pretty quickly. Unless they're like mythic rares or whatever. So what is going on with this card? I mean, I can read it. I know it's solid, but who could have predicted this card would perform this well?
Jason could have.
Jason?
Yeah. ILTG. He on day 0 was like, this card is great. It's a fantastic card.
Oh, I remember you said that. Yeah.
And then it was, and he drafts a ton. He's very good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the answer, Jason.
Okay. Well, my real question was, why is this card so great? I mean, I don't know. I guess I can read it and go, oh, you get these things and it stabilizes you, and the Scry 3 is good at that point, but it's 6 mana.
It's not answerable by 1 card, right? Mm-hmm. It makes 3 discrete creatures. So obviously interacts well against removal. The creatures in this deck aren't generally huge, which is, kind of contextual, right? Like when you play this, you put a lot of blockers into play, and a lot of these decks are not going to have a hard time getting through it. And then Scry 3 means Scry, when you have 6 lands in play already, is really powerful because every land you see is effectively, when you scry it to the bottom, you effectively drew a card because those lands do nothing for you. So Scry 3 is a pretty substantial bonus on a 6-drop, whereas like a 1-mana 1/1 with Scry 3, still obviously that card would be good. It would have some utility, but scrying for 3 on turn 1 is just not that valuable. Like sometimes you don't find lands, great, but for the most part, it's like, well, I need lands and I need spells. I guess I'll keep a land and a good spell and put a decent spell on the bottom. Whereas on turn 6, you're like, all right, bidding these 2 lands, keeping this good spell, or bidding all 3 or whatever, and getting good value off of it. So, yeah, it's worked out really nicely. There are some ways to pump the Samurai and stuff like that that are nice too. Vigilance isn't bad. So, I mean, we obviously weren't like, aware of like how good it was. We're like, oh, this looks pretty strong. I don't know, it costs 6 mana. And it's just, no, this card's fantastic. So
yeah, it felt very much like a filler 6 mana card.
Yeah.
Right. Just felt like, yeah, this is like you're getting 6 mana worth of stuff for this, move on, but apparently it's performing much, much better. Interesting update on this one too. Twisted Embrace, the removal spell. We were a little down on the removal last week, right? Not saying not to play it, but just saying like, this isn't necessarily the format to be, quibbling over 1-for-1s when everybody's playing sagas and stuff like that. But it's actually performing quite well. On 17 lands, it's 6th common overall. A little surprised to see that myself.
Yeah, I guess there's enough synergies, and it's just unconditional removal. You get, even on a bear level, like if it works right, if they don't kill in response, you get +1/+1 and it kills something. Like that's some good value.
Yeah. And just to round out, to tell you what the top 5 are, these are the more type cards that we would think outside of the Oath, which is number 1. 2 is Okiba Reckoner Raid. Yeah, that card's just been a house. Spirited Companion is next. So we talked about that, the dog that draws you a card. And then Virus Beetle, which is like the anti-Spirited Companion. And then the last one before Twisted Embrace is the Modern Age, which we've both really, really liked. So there you go. And then Tameo Safekeeping. This one is really interesting as well.
Yeah, I would not
it's the number 1 green common right now.
Doesn't say much for green commons, but yes, that is.
Guess not. It's at 58.2, which isn't super high, but it's good enough for top, just eyeballing it here, top 12 or so. Just edging out Fang of Shigeki. I'm going to need to play this card. I mean, I've had a few people play it against me and have been like, okay, yeah, it counter my removal spell. I'm not really surprised that it works well in the format. The removal's very slow. A lot of it costs 4 mana, the unconditional stuff. So, okay, I get that part of it, but wow, those green creatures must really be worth protecting because I'm shocked to see Tameo Safekeeping number 1 in that spot.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, it is good. It's 1 mana.
Yeah, you know, we and it's edging out the other 1 mana card, by the way, the Fang. So, yeah, 1 mana for life, I guess. Okay, let's call it a show there, Luis. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the format. It has proven to be a complex, diverse, and pretty cool format so far. You know, we were high on it coming in, and I still feel like there's room to explore. And sometimes even by this relatively early stage, we've still got a few more months of having this set. I'm already feeling like, okay, I kind of get it. And I'm like, no, there's some stuff I haven't done yet. There's some cards I haven't tried. The commons are shifting around quite a bit on the, you know, how they're doing on 17 lands, which means people are trying new stuff and things are kind of settling. So we've still got a little bit of runway ahead of us before we're over it, you know, with the set. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find all things related to the podcast at lrcast.com. I want to thank our sponsors, channelfireball.com, for everything you need magic related, and ftx.com outside the US, ftx.us inside for all of your digital asset needs. And yeah, that's going to do it for this one. We'll be back next week with more. We'll see you then.
Yeah, I struggled about what to say here. But I decided to go for it anyway, because, you know, as almost everyone knows now, there's a, you know, armed conflict of war in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of people like ask like, hey, what do you think about that? Or like if you stream, it's like, hey, what are your thoughts on that? And well, first of all, war is terrible. You know, we are like me and you and a lot of our listeners are incredibly privileged not having to be dealing with this, not having this happen where we are. And that's something that, you know, you're there but for luck. That's it. You know, you really should keep that in mind. If you were born in a different place, then maybe this could be something you were dealing with, or you have relatives who are dealing with. And my heart goes out to all the people impacted by this. But I also I just don't really know. Like, certainly looks to me like Russia is, you know, making an aggressive move, trying to take more territory, take more resources, and that's awful. But I don't really know what I can add to the conversation past that. I'm really not trying to like overstep here. It's terrible. You know, the silver lining is it seems like a lot of people are kind of supporting Ukraine, and that is awesome. It seems like I would think this is a misstep by Russia. I hope it is, because that would send the message to maybe other countries that you shouldn't get into unprovoked wars. But
it is being viewed that way currently. It's early still, but it is being viewed right now as this was supposed to go a lot cleaner for Russia and didn't.
Certainly that seems to be that. But also we're just living in an era of just rampant misinformation, an unbelievable, I would say an unprecedented amount is my guess of propaganda. Because
not even remotely close to anything.
It's just been the easiest it's ever been at any time in history to do that, right?
And Russia has state-controlled media as well, so they get to craft the narrative however they'd like.
Oh, I mean, I think the propaganda is coming from all directions. Like, again, not to say that this isn't a weapon that the Ukraine can't use to fight against the vastly, you know, numerically and military superior force that Russia has. Russia's enormous, so this is just one of the tools in their arsenal. But for sure, a lot of what you see is just not true, and just kind of keep that in mind. Don't get set off and go running. You know, there's I can think of already like 3 or 4 times that we've had footage from video games passed off as footage from the war.
Yes.
Like, you know, we're getting better and better. Video games are looking better and better. And all of a sudden that means like these clips can just be that, or
there's been a ton of the stories and pictures that have come from prior wars that have nothing to do with this conflict. Yeah. That's
pictures that are used to be like, look, here's a picture of captured Russian prisoners, or here's a picture of captured Ukrainian prisoners. The same picture.
Yes.
Depends who tweets it out, you know, and like, so keep that in mind. Like, again, I'm not trying to take anything away from the fact that this just very clearly appears to be a terrible act that's going to lead to a lot of lost lives for, you know,
it is
greedy purposes, which is just how a lot of wars happen. But I also just want to caution you that, man, there's just so much misinformation going on, and you shouldn't be getting good information from us. We're not qualified to give you that. So just keep in mind who you're seeing on Twitter or where other places you get information, because it's hard to sort out what's real and what's not. Obviously, like, that doesn't take away from the pain and suffering of the people who are experiencing this, but I don't really have – it's just like even now I don't feel like I added a whole lot to the conversation, but I don't know. I just wanted to offer whatever I could here because, you know, people for some reason like to listen to us talk. But I don't know. It sucks, man. I wish I had something better to say than that, but I really don't.
Yeah, I've been reading about it too, and it's just terrible. For just to put a cap on it, I do try to get the best information that I feel I can. I agree with you that there's no such thing as perfect or clean, unbiased, whatever, but I do read the BBC. Mm-hmm. That's what I read for my news. I don't read any of the ones over here. I don't read CNN or Fox or any of the ones that have become, pushed to the edges a bit more. I try to read BBC, which I at least believe is trying to uphold some journalistic integrity. It's the best I've been able to find.